All right, all right. Welcome everyone. Welcome back. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Minhal Ahmed. I am a MCAT tutor here at MST. I've been tutoring with MST for the past year. A little bit more about myself. I grew up in New York. I graduated from Northeastern University back in 2019, and I spent the past year living abroad in Ireland until the coronavirus happened, where I was studying actually public health, ironically. And now I'm back in Boston working in biotech. And you know, this is for those of you that might be returning from previous MCAT Mondays. This is our final installment of the MST MCAT Mondays that's been going on for the month of November, where we have basically been, you know, going through, diving in section by section um, on the MCAT and talking about what you need to know, what the section entails, what are some test taking tips, common mistakes to avoid, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the last installment focused on the psychological and social foundations of behavior. There's also a little biology in there as well. And we'll get started. Okay, cool. So yeah, it looks like a lot of y'all have been to the previous one, which is awesome. So that makes me super happy, and I hope you found them helpful, and that's why you're back. So I hope we can deliver again today. So without further ado, let's get started. So we'll start off with an overview of the Psych Soc section. I'm just going to refer to it as the P&S section. We're going to go over must-know topics for this section, very similar to previous MCAT Mondays. We're going to talk about, of course, common mistakes to avoid in testing tips and strategies, specifically for the Psych Soc section. And then instead of going through a passage, what we're going to do instead is go over a high-yield concept that shows up every single time on the Psych Soc section. And I think it's really important to know because, you know, in my experience tutoring over the past year, this topic actually tends to trip up students quite a bit, surprisingly. And so I want to go over that because if there's one thing I can, you know, have you walk away with tonight, it's something tangible that'll serve you in your MCAT prep. And I think that, you know, hopefully we can do that with one of these topics for tonight. And then finally at the end, we're going to have some Q&A. So we'll just keep it moving. For those of you that are unfamiliar with MST, we are a one-on-one online tutoring service that serves, you know, aspiring physicians all the way from their pre-med years all the way through residency and boards. MST's been at this for over 14 years, and it's, you know, the reason I joined MST was because it was clear to me that this was a place that really prized the one-on-one teacher-student relationship. It's weird to even say teacher because I think that really what the tutor student relationship ends up being is more peer-to-peer. And I've definitely viewed my students as kind of, you know, future colleagues and friends really that I'm working together with and making sure we can reach their goals. And so this love for teaching, this love for these relationships is really not unique to me at MST. It's shared with virtually every tutor I've spoken to with this organization. So super happy to be here. That's a little bit about the org, and we'll get right into the Psych Soc section. That's why we're here. So basically this slide is just meant to give you a high level breakdown of what you can expect when you click next on your MCAT and you end up on the Psych Soc section. So like most of the science sections, so pretty much identical to the, or not pretty much, absolutely identical to the biochem and chem phys sections of the MCAT, you're going to have 59 passage-based and discrete questions on the Psych Soc section, and you're going to have the same amount of time. You're going to have 95 minutes to tackle these questions. So roughly this breaks down to about 8 minutes per passage, but the timing can really vary depending on the passage. So I wouldn't worry too much about timing at this point in your prep if you're just getting started out. But really, you know, you want to make sure that what you take away from the slide is the subjects that are tested and the skills that are tested, and just get a kind of sense for what the test looks like. I know when I first started my MCAT prep, I really didn't even know it was passage-based. I honestly thought it was going to all be discrete questions, which is a huge, you know, a huge aspect of the exam that everyone should know up front. So it's going to be mostly passage-based. You're going to have some discrete questions sprinkled in here and there. For the Psych-Soc section, which by the way is the last section on the MCAT exam, so it's the fourth and final section, and a lot of times students feel a little bit fatigued going into it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're planning for this section. Is bear in mind that you might want to account for some kind of fatigue when you actually get to this part of the exam. The subjects tested are going to be 65% intro psych, 30% intro sociology, and 5% intro biology. They got to stick some biology in there because it's the MCAT. But the vast majority of the content you'll see here is going to be intro psych. And so it's really important that, for me personally, I didn't actually take a dedicated psych course in my undergrad. And I actually think that that is more common than is typical for other pre-med requisites in college. So I think that it's very likely that some of you here didn't take a formal course going over college level psych or soc, but rest assured that you will be able to do well on this section even without such coursework. The content review resources that we'll go over later on in this webinar should suffice in getting you up to speed with everything you need to know. Moving on, for those of you that are returning from previous MCAT webinars, this looks really familiar. And I'm glad you're seeing it 3 times because it's that important. And for those of you that are seeing it for the first time, this is a major takeaway I want you to take home with you from these webinars. So the way the MCAT is designed is every question is going to be tied to a subject and also a skill. So a foundational concept and also a foundational skill that the MCAT is designed to test. For the science sections, this breakdown is relatively even across the 3 science sections. And of the 4 skills, this is how they sort of vary from section. Vary across all questions. So 35% of all the questions you see on these science sections are going to be just based on the knowledge of your scientific principles. So these are the kinds of questions we're used to. They're questions that are just going to be on whether you know it or you don't. They're going to be asking you about a concept or a term or a principle, and you're just basically going to bring that knowledge to answer the question. But that's only 35% of the skills that are tested, right? Almost 70% of the skills that are tested on the MCAT have to do with this, this R word that's super important for the MCAT called reasoning, right? So 45% of the MCAT is actually testing your scientific reasoning and problem solving. 10% is testing your reasoning about the design and execution of research, and another 10% are testing your database statistical reasoning. Really what all this means, those are 3 different forms of just testing your scientific reasoning skills. Reasoning about research and database statistical reasoning, I think definitely falls under the overall umbrella of scientific reasoning. Can you do real world practical science where there's actually a lot of inductive and deductive reasoning you need to do, and it's not just cut and paste from previous things that you've read, right? So that's really something that the MCAT is designed to do. If you'll notice, it's not unique to the biochem section. It's not unique to the chem-phys section. No, every single science section on the MCAT is going to have this breakdown of skills tested. So overall, 70% of the MCAT is more about reasoning than it is about knowledge. That's what I want you to take away. So moving on, for those 35% of questions, and obviously, in order to reason, you need to have the scientific principles down pat as well. So these are some must-know topics that I've just gathered for the Psych-Soc section, like I've done for other science sections on the MCAT. And by no means is this list exhaustive, but I really honestly tried to pick things on this list that I feel you will see on virtually every single Psych-Soc section you take, right? The breakdown of the topics varies from test to test. But I think these things are so high yield, you will see them in some form at some point in your psych-soc section. And so that's why I think they're must-knows. So the first thing is developmental timelines and stages. And by the way, if you are just now getting started in your prep, and a lot of these words don't seem familiar to you, if you don't know who Kohlberg and Piaget is, don't worry. We are just identifying these for you so that you're able to jot them down and you can, make a point to focus on these in the future. And really what this is about is creating a roadmap for you. So don't fret if you don't recognize some of these things, because I know when I started out, I certainly didn't. So first thing would be developmental timelines and stages. A huge part of the psych-soc section is actually understanding all these different stages of development. And so this includes stages of moral development, stages of cognitive development, stages of psychosexual development, that would be Freud, and stages of psychosocial development. So these four, very prominent figures in the behavioral sciences are going to be people you become very intimately familiar with throughout your MCAT prep. But more importantly, you want to understand their ideas as they relate to developmental timelines. And so remember these four names, because you're going to want to dive into how they saw the progression of, moral growth in human beings, how they saw the progression of, cognitive development in young people. So keep that in mind. That is definitely something that comes up again and again on the psych-soc section. An example of that kind of question would be sometimes as straightforward as a 2-year-old would be in what stage of Piaget's cognitive development, right? And that's just calling on your knowledge. That's one of those 35%. That's just calling on your knowledge of, what stage would that 2-year-old be in. And so those are absolutely must-know topics. The next one being, and I throw this in there because it's not immediately apparent that this is a psych-soc topic, but sensation and perception are absolutely found on the behavioral sciences section. So, on the psych-soc section. Not saying that they won't be found on other sections, but they are a staple of the psych-soc section. So when I say sensation and perception, what I'm immediately referring to are the visual and auditory systems. So what is the biology of the eye, right? All the different parts of the eye, all the different functions of the different structures in the eye. Same thing with the ear. How is sound transmitted through, the outer, middle, and inner ear? What are the mechanisms that sort of allows those pressure waves to be transmitted into sound signals to the brain? The visual and auditory systems are absolutely going to be something that are tested, something that's tested on the psych-soc section. The other thing that only partially has to do with sensation and perception, but overall, the nervous system, you need to be familiar with brain structures and function. So what's the limbic, what sort of components of the brain make up the limbic system? What is the hypothalamus responsible for? What is the frontal lobe mostly responsible for? And so being able to point to different regions of the brain and say what their role typically is going to be something you want to have going into the psych-soc section in the future. So those are a couple things to get you started off. The next thing, this is getting into more, deep psychology, are going to be different theories, right? And there's actually way more sets of theories than just emotion, motivation, and language. You'll have learning, you'll have identity, you'll have attitudes and behavior and all sorts of theories. But I like to break them down this way because you want to chunk all these groups of theories in their corresponding bucket. I think that's the best way to learn about them, because then you can compare and contrast the different theories as they relate to emotion, right? What's the different? So James Lange, I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Cannon-Bard, Schachter, Singer theories of emotion. How are they similar? How are they different? What different thing do they all have to say about how we experience emotion, right? And that's actually another high yield topic that comes up. That's probably the most high yield thing on this page. You're gonna need to know that like the back of your hand, the differences between these three theories of emotion. when you learn them in buckets like that, it's a lot easier to group in your head, rather than just, learning all these theories kind of at random. The next thing would be theories of motivation. That would include, instinct theory or arousal theory or drive reduction theory. Again, if you don't know what those terms mean, don't worry. It's actually a lot simpler than it sounds once you get into, the definitions and the explanations for these things. For language, you're going to want to explore the learning nativist and social interactionist theories. But I'm not going to sweat too much going into details here. What I really want you to take away is you're going to want to walk away with sets of theories for each of these very big picture buckets. And those big picture buckets are going to be very clear to you once you dive into your prep. You're going to see that emotion is a major topic, attitudes are a major topic, motivation and language are major topics, and that's why they're here. And learning is another major topic. And different psychologists and scientists have different sort of theories behind the mechanisms that underlie each of these very human psychological phenomena. Just a little side note, I think even though I was a bioengineering major, I didn't take a psych soc class in college, or at least a dedicated psych soc class. I still love this section because it is the most directly human, in my opinion, right? And I think that is very much a strength of this section, is that it can be fun if you apply it to your life. And I think that with this section, it's actually the easiest to come up with real life scenarios that tie into the concepts that you're learning. And when you can ground these abstract things in your real everyday life, then it makes it all the more powerful, not just to learn, but also to, kind of enrich your experience of life. It's getting pretty deep there. But moving on, so you're also going to want to know, this is more boilerplate stuff. You're going to want to know the different personality and psychological disorders, ranging from, I don't want to scare anyone with all the terms, but what's the difference between borderline personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder and things like that. You're going to be graced with very comprehensive lists of these personality and psychological disorders. I just want to put it up here. My only goal is to let you know that that's a topic that is going to be worth exploring in depth when you get ready to study. And then finally, this is something I want to focus on in particular, or types of study designs. And so research methodology, which includes, the kind of study you use, whether it's a longitudinal study, case control study, we're getting into a little bit of epidemiology there, but these types of study designs, you want to understand the strengths and limitations of each, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later on. But you also want to understand what are the limitations of a scientific research project, right? Or an experiment. What does generalizability mean, right? How generalizable, or how much do the findings from this experiment actually matter to the real world? Do they actually apply to larger society? You're going to want to know how, qualities like generalizability, reproducibility, these general things that kind of dictate the strength of an experiment, are very important for the psych soc section, because kind of a hidden component of the section is research methods, and you want to get a grip on that as well. That's something I didn't quite realize until far later in my prep, so I want to make that clear up front. Okay, awesome. So common mistakes to avoid. So firstly, let me just say that the psych soc section typically is actually and I don't want to generalize because every student's different. And for me personally, this was the hardest section for me to improve my score on. So I understand that these generalizations don't always apply to everyone. But typically the psych soc section is where most students feel the most comfortable and where most students actually end up scoring the best. A lot of the sort of, conventional wisdom around the section is to just, memorize giant sets of vocabulary and you'll be good, because the psych-social section is really just about identifying, whether this thing is positive reinforcement and this thing is negative punishment or things like that, right? So it's basically, people think that the psych-social section is really all about just identifying terms. While I won't say that that is completely false, I think that unlike other sections, you can get pretty far with just pure memorization here. It's not going to take you over the edge and get you a really excellent score. And it is going to leave you kind of in the dark when it comes to nuanced questions that might have several terms that seem to have very close definitions, and you won't know which one to pick. So a common mistake, based on this conventional wisdom that's out there, is to focus on memorization over comprehension. And that is a shortcut that I think will end up hurting you in the long run. If you're just getting started and you're planning your prep, try to make a conscious effort to not just memorize your terms for the psych-soc, right? And I'll talk about that more on the next point. But in order to pick apart these nuanced questions, you really need to have a nuanced understanding of these terms, right? These terms are really things like theories or concepts or principles that have a lot of thought and research behind each of them. And so you want to understand the thinking that went into each of these terms rather than just, memorizing a one sentence definition of them and just moving on. And that'll help you answer more and more questions that are sort of toss-ups. The reason I said to make that initial thought to make sure you focus on comprehension rather than memorization is because it is very easy, and this is a common mistake, to just put off psych-soc studying until the very end of your prep. It's not an uncommon strategy because, like I said, the conventional wisdom is that memorization will take you far in this section. And so folks will, it's reasonable. They'll only memorize this stuff at the very end so that they, they won't have experienced that, learning decay when they take their MCATs. It is virtually uncrammable to get everything you need to know with enough depth and enough breadth to do well on the psych-soc section. So make a point, please, to start reviewing these terms early on and practice them frequently, right? And I'll talk about how a very simple way you can incorporate that into your schedule. So you can ensure you are doing your due diligence when it comes to the psych-soc section. And finally, this kind of goes back to the last must-know topic. A big common mistake is to overlook the statistical reasoning and research methods portion of this section, right? I think a lot of that is because it doesn't really strike us as psych-soc content, but it is very much overrepresented on the psych-soc section. And so you want to be very, comfortable dealing with these types of things. When I say statistical reasoning and research methods, I mean understanding what a p-value actually means. What does a significant result actually mean? What does a non-significant result actually mean? How can we use those p-values to arrive at conclusions based on the data that we've been generating or that we're analyzing, right? Those things are absolutely important, and that's just the basics, but you want to make a point to not neglect that in your psych-soc prep. And that'll actually really serve you well on other sections as well, because the whole test is really testing your understanding of the scientific process, or the scientific method. So that's something that'll pay dividends on the other sections as well. All right, so we went over the overview, we went over the must-know topics, we went over some common mistakes. I want to take a pause point to go over some, resources to keep in mind as you're planning your prep. So in general, for those of you that have been at previous MCAT webinars, right, in general, I say that it doesn't matter what source of content you pick. Some, in my opinion, are slightly better than others. And so if you haven't picked one, I'd recommend you go with these. But if you've gotten, say, Princeton Review or Next Step or Exam Crackers, don't worry. You don't need to go out there and get another whole book set. It is totally fine. You know, you are not going to need another resource set to do better on the exam, right? That's just not going to be the limiting factor. So they're all basically the same. Just pick one and stick with it. Oh, actually, getting too many resources can actually harm you rather than help you, because you're split so much and spending way too much time on content review. But anyway, what I recommend for content review based on my personal prep and my work with students is the Kaplan resource set. And this is what I recommend for, you know, all the top subjects on the MCAT. Maybe not so much cars, but that's a different story. What I would say very particularly for the Psych Soc section is that Khan Academy really excels here. So I know a great deal of students, and actually I ended up doing this, who just totally bypass Kaplan completely for the Psych Soc section and just use the Khan Academy videos. Now, I know these are only going to be available until September 2021. So for those of you that might be planning to take your MCAT even after that, this might not be an option for you. But these videos are phenomenal, and I feel like they do a great job of getting right to the point of what the MCAT is really trying to test you on when it comes to these psych-social topics. Moreover, I think that it's really great that, I think it's really great that there are resources out there that have sort of taken notes on these videos for you already. So it's weird recommending these sort of vague online resources in a setting like this, because it feels like telling you to go do research on Wikipedia or something. But actually on Reddit and just floating out there on the internet, there are these 100-page and 300-page documents that are essentially condensed or very comprehensive versions of all the Khan Academy videos in note form. So, you know, I think that those resources are really great and worth checking out. And MST actually has some resources that are freely available on our website as well that are awesome if you want to dive in and get a high-level overview of the different concepts. For the Psych-Soc section, we're going to want to understand the sensing the environment foundational concept, right? This goes back to that must-know topic about perception and sensation. So if I dive in here on MST's website, I'll see, you know, very great high-level notes for, you'll see a diagram of the eye with all the components and structures that you need to know. If you want to dive into sensory processing in particular, you can get the definitions you need to know. We've really extracted the most important terms that you need, and this is all available totally free. And there's links to other resources right from this website. So feel free to check this out. I think it's an awesome resource. So those three put together, you can't go wrong on a Psych-Soc section. And if you are like me and you didn't take a Psych-Soc class in college, you'll be in good hands. But of course, like I said, 35% of the MCAT tests your knowledge of scientific principles. Almost 70% of the MCAT is testing your scientific reasoning, right? And for practicing your reasoning skills, not only is it important to know the content, it's very, very important to get a lot of practice in. And so like the MCAT is broken up 30-70, I think you should break up your prep time 30-70, 30% content review, 70% practice, because practice is actually better content review. Anyway, I think that the best resources for practice are going to be, bar none, the AMC materials. I would say this is basically non-negotiable for students of the MCAT. I think there's actually, this is ridiculous, but there's also a Cyber Monday deal going on at the AMC. I don't know if this actually includes AMC material, but it might be worth checking out. But when I say AMC material, I mean all the question packs that are available, the section banks, the full-length exams. These are going to be, right from the test creators. They're so close to the real deal. The full-length exams are almost identical to the thing you'll see on test day. So that's absolutely worth checking out. I would recommend saving that material until the very end of your prep because it's the most precious resource. The other thing I'll recommend is, and this, I think this is the most underrated, MCAT resource out there. It's going to be the UWorld MCAT question bank. And so UWorld is a resource that has, basically 2,000 questions. They're going to be passage-based and discrete. And you can use them to, get practice for every science section, even cars, as you're going through your prep before you get into the AMC material. And because, UWorld isn't structured in the form of full lengths. And so you can take, 20 question sets at a time, or, if you're feeling up to it, 80 question sets at a time. It's totally customizable. You can pick and choose which subjects you want in your test. They have a 7-day free trial. So if you want to, check it out for yourself, go for it. I think the best part about UWorld is that they have incredible solutions. So, they're really going to dive into what makes every single answer choice right or wrong, and also talk about the high level topics that were at play in that question, right? And that should give you a hint to what's really important in your practice. You want to understand why every single choice is right or wrong, and you want to understand the broader topic well enough to get a question that is different than the question you got right or wrong, but could be in a similar or tangential, field. So you're not going to see the same question twice, but you might see another question that has to do with, the visual system. So always kind of try and, UWorld does a great job of really focusing on that high level topic for you and reviewing it. And finally, Khan Academy passages, again, these are going to be passage-based questions that are freely available as well. So feel free to use those. And I saw that someone asked a question if all the Khan Academy MCAT stuff is only available until September 2021. And yes, that is, unless I'm mistaken, I'm 99% sure that all that content is going to be removed from the website on September 2021, unfortunately. I don't know what the fate of that stuff is, whether it's going to be, behind a paywall or on some other website. I'm not sure, but I just know it's at this point, it's going to be removed from Khan Academy in September 2021. All right. And then finally, this isn't really practice, but Anki is going to be your friend. I'm not in med school yet, but I've heard that med students really love it as well, or I guess have a love-hate relationship with it, because it's going to be your most used tool when it comes to memorizing vast amounts of information, right? And like I said, I don't like to say memorizing because it's way more important to understand than to memorize. But of course, in order to understand, you need to have a working memory of these things, I guess. Anki is basically a tool that is a flashcard system, right? It's just digital flashcards, but it utilizes spaced repetition, meaning that, and this is actually literally going to be a section on the Psych Soc section that you want to review, kind of on the learning section, but and memory section. But when you see certain things at varied intervals, then you're going to have a greater chance of, consolidating them into long-term memory, right? Because everything we learn is subject to the decay of forgetting, or whatever it's called, the curve of forgetting. But if you see it again and again, and we know this sort of intuitively at various intervals, then you're going to be less likely to forget it. So Anki sort of applies this principle into flashcard form, and it automatically has an algorithm that, flashcards you're getting wrong a bunch of times, it's going to make sure you see them again and again at random intervals. So you automatically, if you just follow your Anki deck, you're going to hopefully, master that entire deck. So that's a little bit about Anki, and there are plenty of resources on YouTube out there on how to actually get started on Anki and set that up. And there's also lots of freely available Anki resources out there, like Anki decks for the MCAT. Alrighty, moving forward. I always think that, these things are gonna fly by and then I end up talking forever. All right, so test taking tips and strategies for the Psych-Soc section. I tried to deviate from the previous science sections that I've covered in other MCAT Mondays, but really, a lot of those strategies apply here. Like I said, because all of these are based on scientific reasoning largely, a lot of those things really apply, but I'm going to focus specifically on the Psych-Soc section here. For the Psych-Soc section, since a lot of the passages are going, and this again applies to most science sections, so a lot of the passages apply to experiments, and experimental design is a major thing that's tested on this section. You always want to highlight the central hypothesis or goal of the experiment in the passage every time you see it, but you also want to highlight the independent variable, that's IV, the dependent variable, that's DV, and the controls. As well. You want to have a great understanding of those four key things. And then for whatever conclusions are presented in the passage, you want to always make sure they are backed up with data. And look at that with a critical eye, right? Because don't take what's presented in the passage as absolutely true. They might say that they saw this trend, but if you look at the chart, it's not a statistically significant, difference between these two groups. And so you might get an answer choice that asks you if the study concluded this, and you are going to have to say that actually, no, technically it didn't, because both of these groups were statistically equal. So always back up your conclusions with data and make sure you get some experience and practice with reasoning, with database reasoning. That just comes with doing lots of practice sections. I said this earlier, come up with personal real-life scenarios to aid in learning Psych-Soc terms. I think that is very useful for this section because, when you learn something like the foot in the door technique, right? That's basically a persuasion technique where you will, if I want my roommate to, basically pet sit my puppy for a week while I'm gone. That's a very big ask, but if I'm using the foot in the door technique, I'll first ask him if he wouldn't mind watering my plants while I'm away, right? And once he agrees to that, then I'll ask him if he wouldn't mind, watching my puppy while I'm on vacation. And so that's the foot in the door technique, right? And so that is a fake real life scenario. I wish I had a puppy. But you can come up with so many of those scenarios yourself that really apply to a lot of I'd say 90% of the terms you learn in this section. And that can make learning these way more fun. And like I said before, just way more enriching, right? It gives you terms that describe things in your everyday experience that you didn't really have a word for before. You maybe knew intuitively, but you didn't have an actual term to put there. So I think that's a really great way to kind of really incorporate the things you're learning just in for the MCAT and also beyond. Moving on, I'd say that you want to review vocab regularly, right? Do not cram. How do you do it regularly? Make it a scheduled part of your day. I'm not going to handhold here. Everyone's different. I find that I learn best first thing in the morning. And so, every morning I'd wake up, have a cup of coffee, put on some a lo-fi beats, that 24/7 loop on YouTube, and just sip my coffee, listen to music, and go through a bunch of vocabulary and review it, make sure I understood it. That was my routine, and it just became a part of my day. And it sounds extremely nerdy, but it was actually kind of relaxing, right? And if you try to make reviewing vocab a regular part of your schedule, it doesn't have to be daily, but try to make it regular. I would say definitely multiple times a week. And you want to hold that throughout your prep. And then finally, know the strengths and limitations of different study designs, right? Can you make a causal conclusion or a causal inference with a cross-sectional study design, right? No, you can't, because you're not actually changing the independent variables in that situation, right? It's just an observational study. It's not an experimental study. And so, that was kind of jumping the gun there. Some of you might not have reviewed that, but that's what I mean. You want to understand the strengths and limitations. Why would you want certain study designs, and what are the drawbacks associated with those study designs? And you want to know that for all these different cases. Awesome. So we're moving on to the end here. We've got about 17 minutes left. This shouldn't take too long, but the last thing I want to go over today is just a high yield content. I decided not to do a demo passage because a lot of these passages actually rely for the Psych-Soc section on knowledge that might not be shared among the people joining us today. Like for instance, in my case, I just had no Psych-Soc background, so I didn't want to kind of waste time going through a passage. But what I did want to go over was just a super high yield content that I think is super commonly misunderstood and students get wrong. And that's going to be operant conditioning, right? So firstly, let me just contrast operant conditioning with what it's not, which is classical conditioning. That's something most of us are kind of familiar with from, the famous Pavlov's dog experiments, right? And that's when he trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell because, every time he gave them food, he'd also ring the bell. And so dogs eventually became, conditioned to associate this stimulus, the bell, with this behavior, right? Drooling. And so that has to do with conditioned and unconditioned stimuli and things like that. Operant conditioning is not about these sorts of associations, right? Operant conditioning is more about the theory of behavior shaping. So operant conditioning is a different type of learning that focuses on how positive or negative stimuli can actually shape behaviors. In the Pavlov's dog case, he's just forming an association between the bell and food, right? He's not really doing much else. But operant conditioning is something that if I wanted to train my dog to sit, right, I might give him a treat every single time he sits or nears that behavior. And so I gradually reward him for things that kind of shape his behavior until he's sitting when I say sit. Right. So that's kind of the difference there between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And there's sort of a high level definition of operant conditioning, but of course, don't stop here, dive deeper, learn sort of the background behind this. What I want to focus on in particular is are these four terms that tend to trip students up a lot, right? And there's two of them that don't, but there's two of them that really do. And as I'm looking at this, I see a typo, but hopefully you guys see it too. Basically, what you want to focus on are, the four terms that are associated with operant conditioning are positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. And it's really easy to think positive reinforcement. It's kind of intuitive. Positive reinforcement, that just naturally strikes us as like a reward, right? Positive reinforcement, it's good, and we're reinforcing it. Negative punishment, that's also or that seems like it would be intuitive, right? Negative punishment, most people think it means, you do something negative to someone to punish them, and then they will not do that behavior as much. But that's actually false. So I'm going to break this down in a way that is very easy to understand, in my opinion, and that'll make sure none of you ever mix these up in the future, right? And in my opinion, after tutoring for a long time and going through this myself and always mixing them up, the source of confusion is the fact that we have connotations associated with positive and negative and punishment that are, colloquial, that are not what we're trying to say in this scientific sense. So in psychology, positive and negative in this context don't mean good or bad. They just mean adding or subtracting. So adding or removing, right? So think of positive and negative not as a good thing and a bad thing, but just adding or removing a stimulus. And then very simply, reinforcement, I think we intuitively know that is something that increases behavior, and punishment, we intuitively know is that's something that reduces the behavior. But you can have a positive punishment, right? And if you're thinking in the terms of our colloquial definition of positive, you'd be like, how do you positively punish someone, right? That doesn't quite make sense. But if you understand that positive in this context actually just means add, you can understand that positive punishment means you are adding a stimulus to reduce a behavior, right? By definition, if something is positive in punishment, we know positive means add, punishment means to reduce behavior. That means you're adding something that reduces the behavior, positive punishment, right? Same thing for positive reinforcement, or oppositely for positive reinforcement, you're adding a stimulus to increase behavior. Now, and this isn't always the case, but a general rule of thumb is if it's positive reinforcement, that generally means you're adding a pleasant or a good stimulus to increase behavior, like a reward, right? So you're giving a dog a treat. You're giving a kindergartner a star, a sticker or something on their exam. A positive punishment, here we're talking about adding probably a unpleasant stimulus. You're still adding a stimulus, but this time the stimulant is actually unpleasant, right? Maybe it's not. Whatever it is, it leads to a reduction in the behavior. That's the key thing to focus on. So positive punishment means you're adding something most likely bad that reduces the behavior. Maybe there's some rare cases where you add something that is technically a good thing, but it still reduces the behavior that you're trying to shape. And so it's still positive punishment. So hopefully I'm not beating a dead horse here, but that is a super simple, and that this is one of those things that triggers a light bulb moment in a lot of the students I work with. And I really kind of think the source of this confusion are these colloquial associations of the terms positive and negative, right? So as long as you remember positive means add, negative means remove, reinforcement means increase behavior, punishment means reduce behavior, you can understand how positive and negative reinforcement and punishment shape behavior as it relates to operant conditioning. So I'll pause there really quick, since this is actually like a content topic. I just want to make sure no one has any questions. So I'll just wait 1 second, but that is the end of the webinar. And so we've got 10 minutes left for Q&A. And I don't think there's any questions so far. So we'll just keep going. Yeah, just to wrap up, right? MST is here to help you get your best results. We are, as an organization, really passionate about making sure everyone is able to meet their goals. That's why we put out so many free resources, as well as offering a lot of this tutoring that is really founded on this one-on-one, very tailored, personalized relationship that can really serve you, right? We've all been in your shoes, and we really care about you becoming the doctors that you want to be and going to the medical schools of your dreams. So MST, sorry, I'm like trailing off because I see folks asking questions in the chat, and I will answer really, really quickly. I'm like terrible at multitasking, but your one-on-one tutoring, what you can expect is a custom study schedule that's really tailored to, your schedule, your strengths and weaknesses, your timeline. We'll work together to construct it. And that's usually a major part of what determines a student's success. Our tutoring sessions are going to be very adaptive. We're going to go through, concepts like we just did in the past slide, also go through passages like we've done in previous MCAT Mondays, but way beyond that, it's going to be extremely tailored to individuals, and we're going to do lots of practice and content prep as needed. It's not just like the tutoring relationship does not live and die in the 1 to 2 hours we spend together weekly or whatever breakdown ends up being. There's regular communication between sessions. I want to make sure, and not just me, other MCAT tutors at MST want to make sure that you are constantly supported throughout this process. And, we take accountability and mentorship really seriously. Awesome. Some other things we offer are strategic planning sessions. Just, if you want to have a one-time session, we can do that as well. And some pre-med coursework tutoring. Alrighty. So I saw Lupa had a question on the concept, so I want to answer this really quickly. So this was the typo I mentioned. Negative definitely means remove. And this is just because I am a bad PowerPoint preparer. So this should say reducing a stimulus to reduce behavior. That can be weird to think about, right? what does that mean, reducing a stimulus to reduce the behavior? Well, a form of negative punishment that's really popular might be like grounding your teenage kid, right? What are you doing? You're removing the stimulus of, you know, being able to go outside, and that reduces the behavior that you're trying to punish, right? Like maybe throwing parties when you're away or something like that. So yeah, pay attention to, I guess, the columns are gold. I messed up there in that quadrant. Thank you. That means a lot. I really hope you guys found this helpful. Again, you know, if you didn't catch previous MCAT Mondays and you want to check them out, they're available on YouTube, as Faith is linking in the chat. Please, you know, reach out if you have any questions, and reach out with feedback on how you think we can improve. If there were things that you wish were included in these webinars, or types of webinars you really want to see in the future, you know, if it's something different than MCAT Mondays, just make sure it's an alliteration. Just kidding. But yeah, if there's anything you want to see, please let us know, because that we want to make sure we're putting out stuff that is really helping students. Again, I really hope you found this helpful. I wish you all the very best of luck in your MCAT prep. I strongly believe that anybody can, you know, get the score that they want, as long as they, you know, work hard and actually work in the right direction. And we want to make sure you're able to meet those goals. So yeah, good luck. Let us know how we can help. And I hope you all have a great week. And if I don't see you before the holidays, have a great holiday season. All righty. Thanks, everyone.